Hi, this is Gustav, the developer of TupiTube. Welcome to our channel. Today it's Monday, and this is our workshop number 18 for TupiTubers. Amazing. I want to say hi to the people joining to the transmission, and I want to say hi to Stupid Robot Fighting League. Thank you so much for your donation. Pretty welcome. Pretty welcome. I want to say hi to Malben and to Mr. Matthew and all the people who is joining this transmission. Thank you so much. You are the inspiration to make these activities. This all is for you guys. Okay, so let's start. What is this workshop about? Today we will learn a little about how to add lights and shadows to your scenes to make them more interesting, more detailed. The nice thing about light is that it gives us volume to the scene, to the characters, to the objects, and it enhances the texture appearance of all the elements. Light is a very handy resource that can be optional or not, depending on the illustration style of your animation project. So, let's make the first question. Do I have to use lights and shadows all the time? The answer is not necessarily. I mean, it depends. Sometimes it is worthy, sometimes it is not. For example, some illustration techniques are very flat, so adding lights effects not necessarily increase the quality of the animation. Over time and after making several mistakes, you will learn how to use it. Nevertheless, adding shadows to your scenes is something that you should know how to do, at least in a very basic way. But let's start watching a little example of a short made by our user Malben, where lighting and shadows are not required, at least from my point of view. So let's take a look at it. Oh, excuse me, let me kill the music for a moment. Okay, now let's go to our website. This is the profile of our user Malben Daniel Silva, a great young animator. So let's pay attention to this work he posted a long time ago. And that's it. It's very short. Okay. The illustration technique of this short is minimalist, and it's okay. If your scene communicates the message you want to deliver, then the product works. Now, sometimes, for some reason, you want to work using a more complex illustration techniques, and that's okay too. In that case, lighting and shading can be a cool resource to use. In the real world, to add lights and shadows for an animation company, you require years of experience. In fact, there are professionals dedicated only to this area. Anyway, remember that this workshop is only a basic introduction to the topic. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. I prepared a little source file with some elements that I want to show you to explain you a little more about lighting and shading. So, let's talk a little about light and darkness. They are opposite concepts. The funny thing, they depend on each other. Light creates the darkness of the shadows, and the darkness of the shadows stands out the intensity of light. It's like a beautiful battle between two enemies. Now, let's talk a little about lights. Light always comes from a source. Common sources are the sun, a light bulb, or a lamp. As you can see in the image, there are many kinds of lights with different intensities and features. When we are going to light a scene, we need to spot the source of light, because depending on the position of the source of light, we will be able to define the shading for the elements within the scene. In the real world, the source light for the scene used to be several, but that's a complex scenario. For this workshop, we are going to work only with one source. Let's take a look at this pretty basic exercise. Here is a happy face. That's it. It's flat cartoon, no big deal. But let's say that we want to add some kind of shadows. We want to light the scene. So how can we do it for this example? Well, I have this proposal. This example will allow me to explain you how to start the process of lighting a scene. As I mentioned before, you always need to define a source of light. In this case, I am representing my source of light with this little yellow circle. But it's just a representation for my explanation. You don't have to add it to the scene. In fact, in this case, the source of light won't be appear on the scene, because this is the limit of the frame. Nevertheless, adding the source of light will allow me to understand where to add the shadows. As the source light is on the top of the character, the shadows should appear in the bottom of the eyes and in the bottom of the face. This example allows us to understand too that you don't have to be realistic to represent shadows. That's important to understand. At this point, I want to talk a little about realism and animation. The coolest thing about animation is that you can break all the rules of the real world. That's the reason exaggeration is a key ingredient of the creation process for animators. There are many ways to represent a character, an object, or an action, and these apply for shading too. This is a very good example of what I'm talking about. But of course, sometimes you want to make a more complex representation of lighting and shading, or light and shadows if you wish. So let's talk a little about shadows. This is a very basic representation of the shadow for a, let's call a sphere. We have this sphere in the scene. I want to represent a shadow. If you pay attention, this shadow is very flat and quite simple. But if I want to, I can increase the complexity of the shadow, adding more layers. You see? So my point is, you can work on complex scenarios or basic, simple scenarios, and both are okay. You can start with the basic, you can start with the simple. I just want you to know that you can make more complex representation of the shadows. It's up to you, and you will try to do it in the way you learn more and you get more practice about the process. So if you try it in this way to represent the shadow of an object, it's okay. One important tip about adding shadows is that it's pretty important that in the color palette you always play with the opacity value, which means the transparency value of the color you want to use. Let me try a pretty basic example right here. For shadows, please try to don't use borderline. The borderline, always try to use a transparent color for it. And for the fill color, usually you will try a black, but black using an opacity value. So you have to learn to play with this control. Depending on the strong you want the shadow, the darkness of the shadow, you will have to set this value. Let me show you two examples. This is a dark shadow, if you wish, but if my opacity value is lower, then the shadow will be soft, will be a little lighter, and I can play with this value as much as I want to. Can you see? So depending on the energy of the source of light, you can play with the opacity of the shadow. This is an important thing to have in mind. Okay? So let's keep working on more examples about lighting and shading and scene. For this case, I'm going to prepare something a little more complex. Let's say that I have this circle, this sphere in my scene, and I want to add lighting and shading to this representation. Give me a second. What I'm going to do, as I mentioned before, the first thing you have to do is to spot the source of light for the scene. So for this example, this will be the end result of the illustration. That's important to say. For the first exercises, we are going to work just on illustrations, and that's important. I mean, we're going to start learning how to light basic illustrations just to get experience. As we understand and learn the concepts, then we will be able to animate light and shadows. But before, we have to start working just with illustrations, with frames, with singular frames. So for this case, the first thing I need to do is to define where I want to set my source of light. What is the location of it? So I decided to pick this place to add my source of light. Now, this is the sphere I want to illuminate. I want to light. So a good practice when you are starting to learn how to do it is to draw these lines. These lines should be start from the border of the source of light, and it should be end in the border of the object you want to illuminate, you want to light. Okay, so this should be the floor, the ground of the scene. Let's say this green line is the ground of the scene. So with this reference, with these lines, I will be able to understand where is the dimension of the shadow I should add to the scene. So now let's add the shading and the shadow for this scene. How to do it? Well, the first thing you can do is to draw, as we did it right here, is to draw just the shadow. As I already have the reference of these lines, I will be able to draw this circle, the main circle of the shadow. If you want to, you can add more layers inside the same shadow. It's up to you. Oh, excuse me. Let's disable this for a moment. Okay. As you can see here, I added several layers to make it more detailed. But you can start working with basic representations of the shadows. Now, this is important about the object itself. Let's enable the source of light once again. Okay, this is pretty important. To add shading to the object, you have to pay attention to this. Part of the area of your element will be making contact, direct contact, with the rays of light coming from the source. That area will preserve the natural color of the object, but you have to pay attention to this. The opposite side of the element from the source of light, they should be they should have a little shadow, a little shading, as in this case. Now, this is important. The more opposite the area is from the light of source, the darkness the shadow should be there. This part should be darker in relationship with this area, because this area is closer to the source light. So basically, these are the steps that you should follow to add lights and shadow to this example in particular. Okay? Well, that's it. Basically, that's it for this exercise, but in this level of understanding, we are going to apply the same rules for all the exercise I'm going to show you in this workshop. So let's keep checking another examples. So here we have a character, and I'm going to define a shadow for it, following the same steps I follow in the previous exercise. So first thing to do, add the source file, the source of light you want to work with. Define the place you want to use for the source of light to spot the source of light. In my case, I decided to set the spot right here, but you can pick any place. The important thing to understand in this case is that the angle of the source light will define the limits of your shadow. The red lines are always a good reference, so you can have a better idea of the dimension of the shadow and the shape of the shadow. Without this reference, it will be harder for me to add the shadow. Okay? So once I have the red lines, I will be able to define the shadow and to recognize which areas, which surface of the character are making direct contact with the source of light, and which parts are opposite to the source of light. That's part that are opposite to the source of light, then I will have to add some shades, some shadows here. Okay? Basically, that's the procedure. As you may notice, it's always the same. It's about practice and it's about get familiar with the shapes you want to shade and to light. Okay, basically that's it. Now, one more thing. If you want to make it more interesting, in this case, for example, I added some kind of, let me see if I can select it so you can see it better. Yes, there it is. You can see this little area. For this example, I included this representation of the projection of the shadow in the air, which is cool. It creates a very interesting example. Now, to make this kind of effect, you have to do exactly the same I mentioned before. I mean, you have to create a shape using just the fill color. The contour color should be transparent, and you have to play with the opacity value. The lower the opacity value, the weak the shadow will be, if you wish. Okay. Stupid robot fighting leak is saying sunburn. Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's check another example of lighting. In this case, we're going to work a little with the face of a character. So I want you to check some details. And this is important. As you can see, in the first layer, I only have the face of the character. Is flat illustration, no big deal. There is not volume. There is not any detail showing me textures of showing me let's say a 3D effect. It's just flat 2D as usual. But what happened when I add lights and shadows to the scene? Let's take a look. Let's see if you can see it in more detail. Can you see the shadows of the face in the character? Please let me know in the chat. As usual, I decided to add the source of light so you can have a reference of the origin of the light. The light is coming from the top of the character, which means that all the surfaces that are not making direct contact with the light will get some kind of shading, like this, like this, like this, like this, under the eyes, under the nose, under the mouth, and in the bottom border of the face. Look the difference without shading, with shading. As you can see, the character starts to look a little more 3D, with more volume, right? Okay, thank you guys. Okay, let's take a look to the second exercise of the face. It's exactly the same. As you can see, it's the same position of the source of light. It's the same position. But what changes here? What changes? In this case, in the second case, the light is stronger. As the light is stronger, then the shadows get a little darker. And this is important. The more, let's say, If the source of light is more intense, then the shadows more uh, will be darker. This example show it pretty well. Okay, now let's take a look to the shading of this face, but setting the source of light in another positions. So what happened if I set the spot of the source of light in the bottom of the face? I don't know if you make that experiment that with a spotlight, put it in your face like this, like in the Nightmare Tales, when you want to tell nightmare tales. Yeah, have you ever do this? It's usual that kids play with that. You get a spotlight and put it in the bottom of your face, and then you start talking about some kind of horror movie, or you know, any kind of story, scary story. Hi Scares, thank you for joining the transmission. Okay, so let's make the difference between this example and the previous one. Here the source of light is on top. Here the source of light is on bottom. So the position of the shadows change to the opposite side. As you can see, now the shadows are on the top areas of the face. It's exactly the same face, but because the change of the position of the source light, then the configuration of the shadows change. Now what happened if we set the source of light on the right or on the left of the face of the character? Let's take a look. Okay, in this example, all I did was to increase the power of the source of light. It's exactly the same example, but now shadows are stronger because the source of light has more intensity. Can you see? Okay. Now let's take a look to this example. The source of light is on the right hand. From our point of view, is on right. Okay. So what happened then? The right side of the face of the character is pretty light. It's enlightened, but the opposite side gets darker. The shadows start to appear in the opposite side of the face. Now, for this case, I create several layers for the same shadow, just for fun, just to make it more interesting, just to create a better impression of 3D, of volume for the face. What I did here is more or less the same I mentioned in this example. Remember when I told you about the layers of the shadow that you can add if you want to? Well, I did exactly the same right here. It's exactly the same. Now remember, the more opposite the area of the element is from the source of light, the darker the shadow should be. The closer is, the shadow should be weaker. Okay, this is exactly the same exercise, but from on the left side, setting the source of light in the left side. Now all I did for the next exercise is exactly the same settings from the previous exercise, but this time uh, painting the face of the character with a pink color. That's it. That's the only difference. To make it even more, I don't know how to say it, maybe realistic, maybe more interesting, more 3D effect, maybe. But this is the funny thing about shading, about lighting and shading. Remember that I started with the same face. Now, if I disable this layer, it's exactly the same face. Look, it's exactly the same face. But if I enable the lighting and the shading values, look how different the character looks. So this is the interesting thing about lighting and shading a character. Now, this is an important tip. If you want to use this resource for your projects, remember that this is time consuming. I mean, you will need to spend a lot of time, extra time, working on these details for your animation. So you should have, yeah, you should decide if you want to use it or not depending on the time you have for your project. Because if you want to use this, you are going to need extra time. Okay? Now for the last exercise of this part of the workshop, I want to show you a complex scenario where I'm going to light and shade a sphere, but using two sources of light at the same time. Okay? I'm going to disable the source so you can watch the details of the shading. In this example, I'm using two sources of light, but the source of light on the left are stronger than the source of light on the right. For that reason, you will see that this area of the sphere is enlightened. This part stands out. On the other side, this part reflects the shadow for this source of light, and this little shadow represents a little the effect of this source of light impacting this sphere. So there are two shadows in the scene. One is darker than the other because this source of light is stronger than this one. Basically, this is it. I have a question for you guys. I'm not sure if you want me to post this source file in my profile on the TupiTube social network. So maybe you would like to download it and watch it and study by yourself. Please let me know in the chat if you want me to post this exercise. Okay? Now to end this workshop, I'm going to show you another example I made, but this time it's not about lighting and shading, just an illustration, but lighting and shading a short scene. So this will be an animated exercise. Okay, so let's take a look how it looks. It's pretty short, but it's a good exercise to play with lights and shadows. let's take a look to the layers. For this exercise, I have to confess that I get a little upset. I don't know how to say it. Obsessed. Take a look. I wanted to create something basic, but actually I added a lot of layers because I started to add more and more details to the shades, to the shadows. Take a look at this. You don't have to do it like that. I mean, you could try just with one layer, one unique layer, one unique shadow. But when I started to animate, I thought, oh, that would be nice if I add this. Oh, that would be nice if I add that. So I added and added and added new layers, and the final result for my animation was this. The good thing about practicing on illustration is that once you have the understanding and the practice, the experience to light and shade your illustrations, then you will be able to apply the same concepts on your animated scenes. Uh, if you want to download it, this example to study by yourself, I want you to know that it's already on my profile. So take a look at it. Let's take a look at it. If you visit my profile on or the TupiTube social network, you will find the video file of the animation, but also you will find the source file of the exercise, so you will be able to download it in case you want to take a closer look at it. Okay, I hope you understand what I wanted to teach you today. I tried to avoid being so boring, so I hope you learn and you enjoy this practice. If you have any question, about this workshop, it's time to let me know in the chat. So please, if you have questions about this workshop, just let me know. I will give you some seconds, and while you do that, let me get back to the music that I always miss it. And let me tell you about our PayPal and our Patreon initiatives. As I mentioned in any workshop, TupiTube is a free software project, so we don't have any kind of funding except the resources we get from our own community. In case you want to support our work, you are pretty welcome to join our Patreon community. On the other side, if you want to donate just $1 just one time, you can do it using PayPal. Here are the links if you want to support what we are doing. By the way, I want to say thank you so much to Stupid Robot Fighting League, because he is the only person that had donated twice in our workshops. Oh, Stupid Robot Fighting League is asking, do you have any videos on animations of explosions? Of course we have. In fact, there are, let me show you. We made, if I remember well, we made a little workshop about, I don't know if it was about explosions, but there are an exercise. the explosion of an asteroid. Oh, here it is. I'm going to...
Aprovecha en abril la temporada de ofertas en alcohol.
Excuse me. I'm going to copy and paste the link so you will be able to check it by yourself. In this in that workshop we explain how to animate the explosion of an asteroid, so I hope it can help you to learn a little about it if you wish. Okay, I have this feeling that it's time to say goodbye. Tomorrow I hope to make to hold exactly the same workshop, but this time in Spanish. Anyway, thank you so much to all of you for joining the transmission. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Stupid Road Fighting League, for your donation. Thank you so much to Malben, to Scares, to Mr. Matthew for being there. I really appreciate it. And as usual, it's time to say goodbye with my famous quote: TupiTubers, keep animating, and see you in the next video.